It's Thursday again, tell everybody to lock in, grab some popcorn, a drink, and go and throw your AirPods in. It's the 1 hour show, constantly speaking facts. Bulletproof stats are always shooting from Matt. And when it comes to Kyle, you getting numbers and style. Jake is gonna educate you, he has that knowledge on file. Players, step your game up, don't be sluggish or lazy. Or Jimmy J might hit you with a shaky baby. Catch him on YouTube or any podcast platform. Breaking all the news down like Shaq does the backboards. No hot takes, this is where the hottest debate's at. Now kick your feet up, cause it's time for straight facts.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome into another edition of Straight Facts. I think we're up to episode 4 already, Matt, in the new season here, presented by Up On Game. If you haven't checked them out yet, go to wherever you find your podcasts and subscribe to Up On Game. Our guys, TJ Hushmanzada, Plaxico Burris, and of course, the man, LeVar Arrington, break down the NFL every week. Highly entertaining. Highly suggest you give them a listen if you have not. But Matt, here we are. Luckily this week, I was actually able to be in my usual setup. I was in Detroit for week 1. Week 2, I'm in the man cave, also known as my living room. Don't have enough space to have a man cave yet. And I gorged myself on red zone football because there was no Eagles. So I want to know, how do you, on a Sunday where there is no Eagles, or there is no, favorite team, how do you take in football?
That's the day where I most invest into fantasy football. Whether it's like Eagles play a Sunday night game or a Monday night game or a bye week or a Thursday night. Whenever one of those scenarios happens, that's like, okay, those Sunday red zone hours, I'm tracking my fantasy team. I'm checking, it's like my main thing on my laptop all the time, because red zone will tell me the scores. I need to check Twitter and my fantasy team. Those are the two things, and that is how I process a non-Eagles NFL Sunday, and I have a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, it is great to not have to worry about your favorite team either winning or losing, or someone getting hurt, or any of the possible ramifications that can come from an NFL game. I was lucky enough to have both Lamar Jackson and Tua T, my man Tua T, showing out. So fantasy was very fun for me. I actually ended up losing in heartbreaking fashion because my opponent had 4 Eagles. Very conflicting feelings there. But we'll move on. No one cares about our fantasy teams. What people should care about, though, are those 2-0 Philadelphia Eagles. Let me hear it one time, Matt. Let's go Birds.
Let's go Birds.
Let's go. I mean, look, we talked about coming into the year, this team is going to go as far as Jalen Hurts can take them. And so far, that's been pretty damn far. It's 2 weeks in. I don't want to, go crazy here, but we watched the Eagles dismantle the Vikings in Monday Night Football. And for this first segment, we're going to give one stat to sum up Week 2's best games. And for a lot of reasons, this was, I think, both of our best games. It would definitely make the list. And the stat that I came to was, when guarding Justin Jefferson, Darius Slay had more catches than Justin Jefferson did. Obviously, 2 interceptions for Slay. Only 1 reception allowed, I believe, when being guarded by Darius Slay. So a dominant performance on both sides of the ball, maybe a little shaky in the second half. But what were your takeaways from that game, Matt?
Number one takeaway is, I think that's the most dominant performance I've ever seen an Eagles cornerback have in a game. Slay was all over the place. He could have had 4 picks, but he plays defense, so he doesn't have good hands. That old adage really came true. And Jalen Hurts had the best game of his career. Like, Jalen Hurts played outstanding football. The offense was better than 24 points. The interception he threw was fluky, just bounced off Gainwell's hands. Got to shore up the special teams because that wasn't Elliott's fault the kick was blocked. But it was a really well-played football game. And Gannon really improved from his week 1 faults.
And now
defensive coordinator for those listening.
I do want to maybe put on some sort of brakes here. Not slamming the brakes, but I think they might need a little bit of a pump here. Because we have to remember, A, who the Eagles played, and B, on what day that was. That being Kirk Cousins on Monday night. One of the most terrifying displays of quarterbacking that you'll find is Kirk Cousins on a Monday night. So, I do kind of hold something back in the sense that they have not really beat a top level quarterback yet. And they're going to get some chances coming down the road here as, I would assume Dak is going to be back, maybe not by week 6, but definitely sometime this year. They also have actually, there's not a ton of good quarterbacks on the schedule now that I'm kind of looking through. They do have the Packers. That's the one that definitely stands out. Maybe it doesn't matter if the Eagles...
Kyler looked pretty good on Sunday. So I wouldn't sleep on Kyler. Kyler could give us fits.
That's true. Kyler Murray. And, maybe we might end up talking about it this episode, maybe not. But our guy Carson Wentz looked pretty good once again in Washington, or at least not as bad as he looked in his last game in Indianapolis. But I do want to circle back to what you said about most dominant performances, because I had the same thought running through my mind. Like, never in my life have I seen an Eagles cornerback be able not only to just do that, like to have that type performance against, when you're guarding Kenny Golladay is impressive. When you're guarding Justin Jefferson, who's regarded as the top, 2, 3, 4 receiver in the league, you could put him up there with anyone. It really, like, I was afraid this would be another shootout like the Lions game was, and it just wasn't. It was a thorough domination through and through. Jalen Hurts in the game, 26 completions on 31 pass attempts, 33 yards, a touchdown. Again, you said he had that fluky interception, and he was able to get into the end zone using his legs, 11 rushes, 57 yards, and 1 rushing touchdown. On the matter of Jalen Hurts, Matt, from what you've seen in these 2 games, do you believe, as an Eagles fan and also as an objective observer, that he's taken that next step, that he's taken the step towards being, one of the top 10 guys in the NFL?
I really want to say yes, but I can't be full homer. I really do like Jalen Hurts. I've liked him since we drafted him. I liked him before we drafted him. I think before the season, if you were to ask me to rank the quarterbacks, I'd say he was probably like 18th, 19th as starting quarterbacks. Maybe now he's like 12th, 13th, which honestly puts you in a spot where you can make a Super Bowl if the team's good enough around you. Jimmy Garoppolo made a Super Bowl just 3 years ago and almost made the Super Bowl last year. Stafford wasn't considered ever a top 5 quarterback until he won the Super Bowl. He was always considered bottom end of top 10, and like that reputation kind of gets altered, and he had a really good team around him. I'm not saying Hurts is that good, but when you have a really talented roster, all Hurts has to do is be good and you can win.
Yeah, I do think, and like I've said it a billion times, I despise the designed running plays for quarterbacks. I cannot stand it, especially when it's a guy who you want it to be, your franchise quarterback. I'm starting to come around, I think, a little bit on the whole running quarterback, because what Jalen Hurts' ability on the ground does, the fact that he's not only like fast, he's also very powerful. You can use him in the red zone and he can fall forward 3 yards and get you a touchdown. It's like exactly what we saw him do. And when it is not the only thing that you're relying on to break the defense, in years past, I think it was kind of either there's going to be an easy completion there or he's going to run, period. What I think he showed and displayed on Monday night is like, you might flush me out of the pocket and I could gain, 5 to 6 yards running if that is the best option. But I saw him a lot of times keep his eyes up, like downfield, look to continue passing after he's been flushed out of the pocket, which is like when we talk about development and adding things and becoming a better player, to me, that was one of the biggest things that was missing, is that ability to kind of reorient yourself after you've evaded pressure. He seems to do that and also now have the ability to make a play on the ground. And I think the sky's the limit for this Eagles team. Funny story, for my job, I oversee 32 podcasts, one per NFL team. And it just so happens that the Minnesota Vikings producer cannot make it for the post-game podcast. So, of course, who has to do the Minnesota Vikings post-game podcast in all of his Eagles gear? It would be yours truly. I did take off the jersey, but the hat was still on. For the Vikings, I think just quickly here, I think a lot of people thought that and we talked about it with LeVar, this would be the year, maybe if any, that the Vikings would kind of creep up and grab the division dominance away from the Packers. I don't want to be too reactive, but based off what you've seen, do you think that's a possibility this year?
The Vikings are good. I think they had a really bad. I don't understand what their way their offense was. The game plan made no sense to me, and sometimes that happens with new coaches, where like people get a little too optimistic after they have a really good week one, and then the film study comes out and the team looks at it and then they adjust, and then it's like the adjustment on top of the adjustment is how you know you're good. And so it's going to see how they bounce back. But as long as Kirk Cousins is the quarterback, I don't see them being. If they win the division, it's because the Packers really fall off, not because they strive past the Packers. Because I can't see Minnesota getting to 11 wins, and to me, that wins the division in the NFC North.
And honestly, if that's the case, if like they're not going to have to get to 11 wins, like what you're saying, like where if it's just a meh division year for the NFC North, like I would actually, rather than the Vikings or the Packers, if you're going to tell me 9 wins the division, the team that I would like to be scrappy and eke that out is the Detroit Lions, who currently are tied for second in points for in the NFL. So I agree with you. I like a big time head scratcher on like what's going on. Granted, when Dalvin Cook has 17 yards on 6 carries, it's kind of hard to have a diverse offense, but we'll see how they adjust coming after this devastating loss. One team that did not adjust or didn't adjust well enough as we move on to our next game is the Indianapolis Colts, who we talked week one have to win, right? They're one of the teams that has to win. Okay, they tie. Well, you know what? Luckily, week 2, they're going to come in against a team that they should have all the reason to be fired up for. They didn't lose, but it was an upset. Like the Texans didn't lose. They're looking at it as a win. So I'm going to count that as a loss for the Colts. And they get goose-egged against the Jaguars, the team that sent them home, sent them packing last year. The stat that stood out the most to me and summed up this game was that Matt Ryan was sacked as many times as Trevor Lawrence threw an incomplete pass. What on earth is going on in Indianapolis, Matt?
This is, if you're a Colts fan, the Frank Reich tenure has been fine. First year, they had Andrew Luck. They made the division round, lost. Then you recover without Luck. You have the Rivers year. You have the Wentz, whatever last year was. And this is a point where it's, okay, this is year 5 of Frank Reich. This can't happen. Like, this is the team that you need to get completely fired up to beat. This is a team, they don't feel like rivals, but they are division rivals who play twice a year. So you know them well, the players, and you know the coach well because you used to coach under him. So you should be able to key with your defensive coordinator about what kind of schemes Peterson likes to run, because hey, they're the kind of schemes you like to run. And Peterson just got really the best of Reich in this game, and I don't understand how Reich can have his quarterbacks perform that poorly in back-to-back games against the same team when that team is notoriously bad. Like, they're the worst NFL team since 2010. Like, just every year except for a blip year in 2017, they've been horrible. And this is the team with the playoffs on the line, your offense collapses, and then in the revenge game the next year with the new QB, your offense collapses again. It's inexcusable.
Yeah, and I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. Matt Ryan with just a woeful performance on offense, 16 completions, 30 attempts, under 200 yards, 0 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Like, they got hit with the book. And we talked about, when the Chiefs were struggling last year and we were trying to point to a reason as to why this is happening. I think it's the same answer for the Indianapolis Colts this year. You can't lose the turnover battle, especially when you're a team like the Colts, where your objective is to play ground and pound football and put Matt Ryan in positions to succeed. I don't know if it's hard to say Matt Ryan isn't washed after seeing those performances. I don't think he's washed, but that's what the evidence is leading us to believe. The 3 interceptions against Jacksonville, I would say, is pretty inexcusable. I'm trying to look now. They did have a couple of pretty big chunk receiving plays. They had a 40-yard chunk from Ashton Doolin, 23-yard from Michael Strawn. They had explosive plays and seemingly should have been able to punch in at least one score. I don't know. Very shocking stuff from the Colts. But looking on the other side, over at the Jacksonville Jaguars, James's dark horse Super Bowl contender, the Jaguars. Trevor Lawrence once again has a career game against Indy. 2 touchdowns, 25 completions on 30 attempts. He had a 121.5 passer rating. And the offense, by all means, was clicking. The big money target in Christian Kirk was dominant in the red zone. They couldn't stay in front of him. 2 touchdowns for Kirk in the red zone. One thing I did want to flag, and especially to you since you're a Clemson guy, I don't know if you had your eyes on this, but I think coming in, the one of the weapons that was touted for Jacksonville, one of the biggest weapons that was supposed to change their offense, was Travis Etienne. And in a game that they were really successful, in a game that they won, Travis Etienne once again was somewhat of a no-show. 3 catches for 33 yards, 9 rushing attempts for 20 yards. But his backfield mate, James Robinson, 23 carries for 64 yards and a touchdown, as well as 2 catches. I got to say, the battle of the backfield is going James Robinson, and I love it because he's an undrafted guy, is going James Robinson's way.
James Robinson, you have to remember, 37 of those yards are on 1 carry. The one thing the Colts did right all game is they shut down the run, other than the 37-yard rush by James Robinson. Etienne, remember, he's played 2 games in the NFL. That's it. Lawrence actually missed Etienne for a wide-open touchdown against Washington in Week 1. Etienne, I love Etienne. It's always dumb to draft a running back in the first round, especially when you're Jacksonville, who has James Robinson. But that's an Urban Meyer thing, so he's gone. So it doesn't matter. And Etienne's going to be a good NFL player in the sense that he'll be a running back that matters in games for a couple years if he stays healthy. I don't see him being this unstoppable force, because he was projected to be a late first-round pick, and then he had early second, and then he gets picked 22nd, and then he has an injury, and he's on a bad team. So a lot of the time, these late first-round picks, if he was drafted by the Chiefs, maybe he's doing better than Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But it's 2 games in. I'm not going to judge Etienne too harshly.
Yeah, it's a good point, especially James Robinson really benefiting from that chunk play. I think as an ETN owner in one of my ESPN leagues, they serve you directly via the banner ads, all of the articles on Travis Etienne. From what I've heard off those articles, they're looking to get him more involved. So we'll see in coming weeks. I did want to flag before we move on. I think one of the big things that was a detractor when we discussed the Jaguars before the season was their defense. So far, 5th in points allowed, 8th in yards allowed, 3rd in takeaways. Doug Peterson has this group play, and Mike Caldwell, the defensive coordinator, has this group playing inspired football. And I think when you look around, the Titans looked god-awful. the Houston Texans should not be winning the division, and they just thumped the Colts. So obviously that's just a single game sample size, and we'll talk about it in a little bit. I just think this is a team that really could make waves in the NFL. And I know we did talk about it, but it's just, I think it's weird, my eyes seeing winning football being played in Jacksonville. I think that's really the part that I have yet to get over.
They're the only team in the division with a win.
What a pitiful division that is. But we won't spend any more time on the AFC South. Again, Jaguars coming out 24-0 over the Colts. We'll move along to another team that's stuck on an O. The Cincinnati Bengals, after I pumped them up, I said there is no way Cooper Rush is going to beat the defending AFC champions. There's no way it's going to happen. And despite that, my Bengals my guys, we were rooting for you all postseason, come out, lay up a dud, end up losing on a walk-off field goal, we'll call it. And the stat that I cannot help but put forth is that despite adding 3 new starting offensive linemen to this team, the Bengals are once again on pace to lead the NFL in sacks allowed. Not only in sacks allowed, or not only this year, I should say, but all years. They are on pace to set the NFL record through 2 games, of course, for NFL sacks, on pace for 110 and a half sacks on Joe Burrow or whoever is in there after Joe Burrow gets hurt on one of these sacks. Matt, we talked about it when they picked Jamar Chase over Penei Sewell. I'm going to continue talking about it now. How come they cannot protect Joe Burrow?
They have the same offensive line coach as last year. That's the only thing they didn't overhaul in their offensive line. I think that's I don't know if that's the answer, but that's something you need to try. There's no reason to keep this guy on the staff. He was the coach of the weakest point on the team that lost the Super Bowl because the Rams pressure, specifically Aaron Donald, got through late in the fourth quarter. And then now they're 0-2, a lot of it because they cannot protect Joe Burrow, even despite the overhaul of the offensive line they did in the offseason. So to me, it has to be a coaching and or scheme issue.
Yeah,
but I also don't want to discredit the Dallas defense, even though I do want to discredit the Dallas defense just because I'm an Eagles fan. But I think their defense they could wind up being one of the best defenses in the NFL. They held Tom Brady and Joe Burrow under 20 points in back-to-back weeks, both without great offensive play. It wasn't they pounded the ball of Zeke to keep them off the field. No, they scored 3 points against Tampa, and they barely squeaked to 20 with Cooper Rush. They weren't. Their defense is legit, and it's because Micah Parsons is just dominating everyone he plays. He's this year's TJ Watt. He might break the sack record.
Yeah, that's a great point. Micah Parsons is super freakish. When Khalil Mack first burst onto the scene and was just doing whatever he wants, granted, he's still kind of doing that. Freakish. Great point on the Dallas defense. Actually kind of slipped my mind that they had, while losing, they had held Tampa Bay to
19.
Yeah. So definitely nothing to sneeze at. And also to answer, I don't know who the Bengals offensive line coach is. He probably is the guy who knows all the really cool nighttime spots when Zach Taylor and Sean McVay and the boys were hitting the clubs. That's how guys get jobs in the NFL nowadays. Apologies to the offensive line coach if he is actually not boys with Sean McVay and got the job off of the merits of his work. But I digress. The Bengals, I think, have a really, really, really big problem on their hands because, and it's so easy to just go and pull the Andrew Luck card and say, look, if they don't do something, Joe Burrow's not going to have a great career. But it's getting to the point where you have to bring it up. It has to be a focal point in the sense that beyond hurting your team in that singular game, you are doing irreparable damage down the road where either mentally it affects Joe Burrow or physically it affects Joe Burrow. We've already seen, and granted, he got hurt. He busted up his knee outside of the pocket. But we've already seen him, be out for the year because of injury. So, while Jamar Chase is really cool and probably the best receiver in the NFL in a couple of years, maybe even right now, I just cannot deny the fact that their offensive line is what is losing them games right now. In my opinion, you look at the tail of the tape and what happened, 7 sacks last week, 6 sacks this week. And against Dallas, they didn't have a play longer than 19 yards. You want to know why that is? Because he probably didn't have time for the receiver to get 20 yards downfield, is my guess. Now, I didn't get to watch the full game. I watched a good amount of it. But that would be my guess, in that even when the pressure isn't getting all the way there, it still impacts the play, even if it's not getting home. And, it's hard enough to block for the quarterback when you have a really good offensive line. It's damn near impossible to do it when you have a bad offensive line. And while I will give it the grain of salt here, while we have kind of detracted very harshly from this Bengals team, they lost in overtime and then they lost on a walk-off kick. Having all of this been true, having the fact that they turned the ball over 5 times in the first week, they still were able to go to overtime. I don't know. Is there a silver lining that you think we may be a little overreactive here?
I think I tend to go to the flip side. They played Mitch Trubisky and Cooper Rush and are 0-2. That can't happen. That just can't. The Ravens look good, even though we'll get to that game. And the AFC is just really hard to get a wild card spot. There's just a bunch of teams. You can't throw games away like this early. I remember the Eagles wound up making the playoffs, but after the Eagles won the Super Bowl the next year in 2018, they lost a lot of stupid games early in the season, and that put them to 5-7. And then they make the playoffs at the end barely because Kirk Cousins chokes against the Bears, and they get squeak in at 9-7, and that's what I feel like this Bengals team probably might do, lose stupid games early because they're not really paying much attention or whatever the reason. For silly reasons they lose, and then they kind of pull together at the end of the season, and whether or not it's enough to get them in the playoffs might be out of their control.
Yeah. No, it's a really great plan. And hey, the hits keep coming for them. They have those 2 tough tests in Trubisky and Cooper Rush. Doesn't get much easier next week. They have either the elite Joe Flacco or our guy, who I'm just so high on, Mr. Zach Wilson, apparently ramping back up.
So the offensive line coach for the Bengals, his name's Frank Pollock. I'm looking at his resume. It's clear what happened. He was the assistant offensive line coach for the Cowboys 2013-14. Then the offensive line coach retired, so he became the offensive line coach 2015 through 17. So the Cowboys had this stacked O-line of incredible talent, and he gets credit for it. Gets a job in Cincy as the O-line coach for 1 year. Then he goes to the Jets for more money, I'm guessing, for 2 years. And the Jets' offensive line with Darnold was not good. Do you remember? And then he goes to the Bengals last year, was his first year, and then we see what's happening this year.
Yeah, ultimately, and granted, I do not want to discount, at the highest level, coaching does matter, and coaching will help in the long term improve your players, but you give the guy the Jets offensive line or give him the Dallas offensive line, and you're going to have 2 different results. And it probably won't have a whole lot to do with his coaching one way or the other. So we'll was it Frank Pollock? Was that his name? We'll let Frank rock out, hopefully improve this. Well, there's really nowhere to go but up with this Bengals offensive line. Speaking of running up scores, running up yards, oh my goodness. The game that took place between the Ravens and the Dolphins, I would go as far to say as it is the best NFL game since that Rams-Chiefs, was it Monday or Thursday night, Sunday night game where the Chiefs... It was
a Monday night game. You're talking regular season though, right?
Of course. Regular season game. since that blow or that fire show between the Rams and the Chiefs all those years ago. And I need to let me just spin around and give myself a nice old pat on the back. Good job, Jake. Because after this game, the stat that sums up the game, Tua Tagovailoa is on pace after that game, per ESPN, to throw 6,300 yards and 60 touchdowns this year. So I was a little low with my guess of 30 touchdowns. He's actually realistically on pace for a little more than that. Jokes aside, how did you were watching on Red Zone. Did you at any point flip to this game to ISO on it, or was it all Red Zone?
So it was with that, I never ISO'd on it except when Red Zone was showing a game I didn't care about,
right?
Because they always do because it's about fantasy, it's about all the touchdowns.
Right.
If they're showing a blowout, I can't think of an example with a team inside the 20. I'd flip to CBS.
Colts versus Jags.
Yeah. And so because I underrated the I don't want to discount Tua. Tua A+, 10 out of 10, perfect game other than 2 picks. But if you do everything else, it makes up for it. It erases those. So the Tyreek Hill versus Lamar Jackson is such a dynamic matchup of anything can happen on any offensive play for either team that it's just electric TV. And as a football fan, it was heaven.
It really, truly was. And I'm kind of a guy who I'm from the Northeast. I like cold, mean, hard-played football. But even I really had to marvel at what was going on. 42-38, the final score. And as you said, Tua went into half, a touchdown, 2 interceptions. It didn't look great. It was very much so the old Tua. I think one of the interceptions went off someone's hands. So I don't really attribute that to him, but it certainly was not pretty. Then the third quarter started. 75-yard drive for a touchdown to start off the half. That was the one to Gesicki where he soared up into the air. And then they forced the Ravens to punt. They punt for the only time in the second half that they would. Then the Ravens go and score a touchdown. That was the Lamar Jackson 79-yard run. The Dolphins answer with a touchdown. River Craycraft, 2-yard touchdown. They drove it all the way. And then this is where the game flipped because it was very much back and forth up until then. It was 21-35. And in their own territory, the Dolphins are able to stop the Ravens. Then they're able to go down and score Tua to Tyreek Hill, force a punt, Tua to Tyreek again, 60 yards. Ravens answer with a field goal to go ahead 3 with just under 2 minutes and 18 seconds left. And then, of course, Tua is able to engineer a drive all the way down inside the 10-yard line. Touchdown to Jalen Waddle. The Ravens are not able to answer. And this is you know me, Matt, I will never not be happy to be right.
Unable to answer is unfair since there was 14 seconds left. Just saying.
Well, hey, man. Hey, if Mahomes can
he got a field goal. Yeah, Lamar's on 4. You can't get a field goal.
Right, no, I know. If that game had been a minute longer, the Baltimore Ravens might have been walking away as the winners of that one. But it just goes this is the exact encapsulation, the times 100 of what I thought when we were discussing Tua at length in the offseason and saying, look, adding Tyreek Hill to this offense changes the gravity of the way the defenses have to play. And if Tua is able to just read the field, he's going to be able to put up huge numbers. And I said there was going to be a massive overcorrection in public opinion of Tua because of this. I do think that, There's a stat that I came across, and we're going to talk about one of the guys on this list, so I won't fully reveal the list. But it was targets on first read. So a receiver that is the first read on that play, how often, who leads the league in targets when they're the first read. And 2 of the top 4 were Tyreek and Jalen Waddle. So that means that it is easy work for Tua. He's looking, seeing someone open, and putting the ball on him. Like, that's beautiful offense. And I truly do think, like, look, the Bills are a better team. The Bills are, I'm not like full stop. The Bills are a better team. The Dolphins will actually push them this year. I'm not saying the Dolphins are going to win the division. I'm saying the Dolphins will give them less room for error than they had last year in that division. So
if I were to make one huge statement about how I view the NFL landscape after watching 2 weeks of football, it's that it's definitely my one change is Dolphins being a fringe wild card to Dolphins are definitely making the playoffs as the best wild card in the AFC, and they're gonna blow out whatever sorry AFC South division winner they play in the first round. I'm just envisioning, so they'll be like a game behind Buffalo in December. They play at Buffalo in December, and they'll lose like kind of convincingly, and it'll be like the you're not ready quite yet kind of thing, and then like they'll lose the division by 2 games, which is actually what happened to Buffalo in 2019. They were, I think, tied with the Patriots, and they had a late December game in New England, and they lost a close game, and then they wound up being the wild card, and then since then have taken full control over the AFC East. And I think if this keeps up, Dolphins and Bills will be a great divisional rivalry for years to come.
Yeah, and I'm looking at their schedule. The Bills do play them next week, and that is, surprisingly, it's a 1:00 game. That seems like a game that if they could, they would flex into the prime time. But looking at the Dolphins' schedule after this Bills game in Week 3, they have the Bengals, very winnable based off what we've seen. Who knows? But
the Bengals might be in must-win mode, though.
It could, or maybe Joe Burrow gets hurt when he gets sacked for the 50th time in 3 games next week. But anyways, we don't want that to happen. Anyways, after that, they have the Jets, the Vikings, the Steelers, Lions, Bears, and Browns. So Lions look pretty punchy this year. Bengals might be in must-win mode, but realistically, aside from that Lions game where they're away, they head into their bye in Week 11. They could have 2 losses in Week 11. I would, if we're sitting here weeks down the road and the Dolphins are into their bye with 2 losses, I will not be surprised. And that, we say that the Bills are clearly a better team, but sometimes that really doesn't matter. Like, the Dolphins are going to be playing because of where they finished last year.
Yeah, but the Bills haven't had it. The Bills played the defending Super Bowl champions, and then they annihilated last year's 1 seed in the AFC. So
again, paper tigers, Matt.
They
were paper tiger last year and are really this year.
You win 40. It's hard to beat anyone 41-7. If you put the 2008 Lions out there, most of the time they wouldn't lose 41-7. It's hard. 41-7 is a huge win.
There are moments where with the Bills, and we've already seen it through 2 weeks, where it's when you're playing Madden on a really easy game mode, and it just seems like there are guys open by 10 yards. And, that's easy. Nice little enjoyable game. That's what the Bills play every game. Everyone is running wide open. Stephon Diggs is either does an in route and you're 10 yards away from him, or he's on a streak and you're 10 yards behind him, it seems. Based off of watching some tape, that's all of the snaps this year.
I really think there's a scenario where the Bills are 11-0 and ESPN's running segments about could this be the greatest ever NFL team? And they'll be wrong, but that scenario, I think that's a very plausible scenario.
So it was interesting. It's funny you bring that up, and we can use this to transition into our next segment, Bet It or Forget It. Because I was looking, they have odds out for first loss for the undefeated teams. So there's 4 of them. It's the Eagles, Bills, the Bucks and the Chiefs. And for the Bills, I think they play like the Buccaneers coming up here, and that was like the closest odds. It was maybe plus 200. And then it goes on and the odds start really ramping up for first loss. And obviously it's because they account for it probably being in one of the first 8 weeks. And then at the very bottom, it says undefeated season. That's only 22-1.
That's a sucker bet.
Those odds are nowhere near good enough, or the Bills are really effing good. We can use this to kind of roll into some of the other bets that we have. I agree with you. I wouldn't bet that. But like, is it really like in terms of the 4 undefeated teams? Number one, who do you think has the best chance to go undefeated? And is there really even a chance of that happening in your approximation?
I'm just gonna go Tampa because I think one of the only reasons Brady's played this long is that his undefeated season got thwarted, and like part of his reason that he's playing despite having nothing to prove at all, is that he desperately wants to redeem 18-1, even though no one thinks that's a stain except himself. So I just think, and the NFC is weaker than the AFC, so Buffalo plays harder games. I think the NFC South is a weak division. Like I don't think like Tampa's going undefeated, but if I had to pick one, I'd pick the pathological winner.
That's not a bad bet. They would be 42-1 to go undefeated. The Chiefs 48-1.
What are the Eagles? 120?
So this is what's really weird. It does not list the Eagles on this bet for me. It's only I'm looking on FanDuel, and there are only the Bucks, Bills, and Chiefs. And what I will say, having worked in betting, is it could very well be that they deem this somewhat of an information market. I don't know why or how. It's complete random luck. But for instance, other information markets like the NFL and NBA drafts, you are not allowed to bet on in PA for whatever reason. So I would imagine that because this is a little bit of a weirder bet, maybe it could fall into whatever legislation prevents the NFL and NBA draft from being bet on. Literally 2 of my favorite events as a bettor to like dig into, and I can't bet on them. So that's great. One thing that I can and have and may again bet on is our guy to a T for MVP. It's 25-1. Matt, are you betting that or forgetting it?
Too late to bet. If you miss the boat, it's too late. Don't try to hop on. It's not worth it. I don't see. You got it at 60-1 preseason. Fantastic, unbelievable, A+ bet, great value. I don't see the MVP going to a player who I don't think is going to win the division.
Good point.
And I think the Dolphins, Jared Goff had like MVP numbers some years, even though we collectively as an NFL fan base were like, yeah, but we know that's like McVay and like Cooper Kupp and everything, right? And I feel like that's kind of what I think Tua is probably where Goff was. Goff was very quality, bottom end top 10 quarterback for a couple of years. That's where Tua is this year, and I think the betting public or the NFL public is smart enough to see that he could be great season, like most improved award, but not MVP at 25-1.
You know, I think you make a great point in saying, like, how are you going to give the MVP to the guy who comes runner-up to Josh Allen, who probably is going to have as good, if not better, stats? Granted, hey, 6,300 yards and 60 touchdowns might get the MVP award for good old Tua, but if he falls short of that, you are right. It may be a tough road to tread. Just reading off some of the favorites for the NFL MVP, you have Josh Allen at plus 270, Patrick Mahomes at 5-1, Jalen Hurts, the third favorite. Oh my gosh, 10-1. That brings me such like.
Wait, where's Brady? How is Hurts ahead of Brady?
It brings me childlike joy to say Jalen Hurts is named third when talking about MVP awards. But Lamar Jackson is 13-1, Justin Herbert is 13-1, and Tom Brady comes in at sixth, 18-1. I'll keep going because Tua is 10th. You have Aaron Rodgers with 20-1, Kyler Murray 25-1, Russell Wilson for whatever reason 25-1, as well as our guy Tua. Russell Wilson, let me tell you what.
If you have to pick between Russell Wilson and Tua, bet Tua.
I'm smashing right over Russell Wilson. I'm definitely taking Tua. Joe Burrow, Matt Stafford, some guys with the same odds as Tua as well. So it'll be interesting to see. I think the NFL MVP ultimately goes to the quarterback on the best team, the best quarterback on the best team. But we'll have to wait and see. Moving on to another team that we were impressed with and talked about this episode, the Jacksonville Jaguars to make the playoffs is plus 250. I love that. I might bet that during the show. Like I might, when you're talking, I might go bet it right now. That's like a bet it, right?
If I were to pick the division winner right now, I would pick Jacksonville. I'm so displeased with everyone else in that division. Like there's scenarios where like the Colts get it together maybe, or the Titans get it together maybe, but get it together, like I still don't see, like Jacksonville could squeak to 9 wins and that gets them the division win and that gets them in the playoffs. 250, I think that's really good quality and really good value.
Yeah, it's bizarre. They're plus 290. They're the third
290
plus 290 to win the division.
Do that instead of the playoffs,
instead of the Colts or the Titans. And I think it's funny when we think about teams and we think about their supposed value is almost directly tied to their passing offense, right? Like Colts have a very, very, very solid team outside of Matt Ryan. He's hurt them. Obviously, they're 0-1-1. They're still the favorite. And you look at like public opinion on Tennessee. Again, we called them awful was a word that we used. So they're still ahead of them. So it seems that Vegas, I think, doesn't value passing offense and the razzle dazzle of like long plays, maybe as much
Peterson gets no respect.
That's probably an angle of it too. I really have to say, I don't really root for teams outside of the Eagles, but I will be rooting for Jacksonville to succeed this year for sure. Staying in the division on the flip side of that, Matt, you had one if you want to espouse on it.
Worst record in the NFL.
Wow.
Absolute, complete train wreck collapse. Everything can go wrong, will go wrong. Derrick Henry has a tiny tweak in his ankle that's like he'd play through, but it's like a season-ending injury because he hates playing for an 0-7 Titans team kind of thing. Like this, it's plus 2,600. They are 0-2. They have the worst DVOA in football. They get killed by the Bills, like absolutely unbelievably embarrassed by the Bills. They beat the Bills last year in the regular season on Monday night in like a really fun game at the end where Josh Allen was stopped by like an inch on like 4th and inches.
Right, and then McDermott had to answer for it. I remember that.
Yeah. And just they lost to the Giants. I know the Giants are 2-0, but the Giants barely beat the Panthers. The Giants are 2-0. The Panthers started 3-0 last year, and they were horrible. And that's what this year's Giants are. They're 2-0. They're horrible. The only difference between the Giants now and what I thought they'd be is that they're beating some of the other horrible teams. So I thought they'd lose to the horrible teams. They're better than the horrible teams, so they're just bad instead of horrible. Those back-to-back weeks, they're done. They're done. It's a bottom-out year, worst record in the NFL.
I would say they are completely done if they did not have like the number one rah-rah, we're never dead coach in the league in Mike Vrabel. For that reason alone, I think let's talk about because I don't it could be really good value. Even if you bet it right now, I can't even imagine if I know one of the hosts on BetQL that I used to work with bet it before the year. that's just like crazy foresight, and I'm sure he got a massive number. But like what I wonder is what does that record look like to get there? Because ultimately, like, are they going to win less than 3 games?
3-14, I think, is in the cards. If you look through their schedule, they probably their division makes it tough because they probably split with all their teams, but that might be all their wins. So,
Right.
so
That's a good point.
I can't see. I just feel like this is a team whose run is at the end, and it's a hard stop ending.
Yeah. The favorite, by the way, for this category is division mate Houston Texans at 3-1, the favorite to have the worst record in the NFL. But I don't know if the Broncos just stink, but that Texans team looks a little punchy. 2 straight weeks where they really batted above their average here. So, you know what? Go ahead and throw some pizza money on the Titans to finish the worst in the NFL and buy yourself 100 pizzas when it comes to fruition. 26, I don't know. However it ends up working out. Last one here, and then we'll get to at the buzzer. I mentioned the list of first read targets and for wide receivers. And I think it's an important metric because, one, it shows how well the offense is working. It shows that the quarterback is very in sync, and that not only that, the wide receiver is talented enough to beat whoever their man is and be that first read. So one of the guys, I mentioned number 2 of the 4 were the Miami receivers. The other 2 guys in the top 4 are Cooper Kupp and Jamar Chase. The 5th guy on that list is currently the 3rd favorite to win Offensive Rookie of the Year. He was my pick before the year, that being Garrett Wilson at 10-1. 8 catches on 14 targets for 108 yards and a touchdown, and that's with Joe Flacco. Not that it's going to get any better, but it's worth noting that that's with Joe Flacco. Is that something that you would be interested in betting, or are you forgetting that one?
I like Jahan Dotson to win.
He was who I had on here initially, funny enough. And I was like, nah, he's not going to win.
Mostly because I think if two players have similar-ish stats, and I think they will, the team that almost makes the playoffs or barely makes the playoffs they'll get the nod. And their odds are close enough that I'd rather bet that one than Garrett Wilson. Although Garrett Wilson's having a very good start to the season.
I was really impressed, and I thought that the presence of Eli Moore might kind of detract from his ability to see the ball. Like, he got 14 targets, and as I said, 5th in the NFL, not among 5th in the NFL on first read targets, up there with guys like Kupp, Waddle, Tyreek Hill, and Jamar Chase. So I may bet this one. I don't know how much I really want to bet money on someone wearing a New York Jets uniform. Generally, I think historically, at least in my lifetime, probably not a very equitable venture. But that's all that we have time for in this episode. Before we get out of here, we can get some shots up at the buzzer. Matt, what do you got for us?
Shout out to LeBron James and everyone else who publicly stated how much of a disgusting pig they think Robert Sarver is, which forced the public pressure into making him saying he's selling the team and his WNBA team. Just because of the big corporate doesn't make the right decision as the NBA did not do with their foundings, doesn't mean that it's over. Public pressure can always get things done, as we've seen over the past couple of years, in a lot of ways. And this way, it's just get a scummy owner out. It's great for the league and for just people in general that he is away from running a business.
Yeah.
And it's good that hopefully that sale takes place sooner rather than later.
One small removal for the NBA, one giant removal for humankind in getting Robert Sarver out of there. And again, I think when James was talking about it last week, it was said that until their pockets start hurting, it may not happen. I think PayPal was the first sponsor to be like, we're not going to be engaging in a sponsorship if he's still the owner. pretty effective and pretty immediate action after that. I found it comical in a cynical, bad way that Robert Sarver would say the reason he's getting removed is because of the unforgiving climate of today. No, it's because you're an absolute freak of nature who doesn't deserve to be running an NBA team. That's why you're getting removed. Anyways, that's a great flag there at the buzzer, Matt. My at the buzzer is, I'm not going to name names, and Matt, I will divulge after who this is. But there are some times where you see people on TV and, they're relatively well known for whatever they do. And at least I have the conversation in my head, like, to become a big star, a big TV star, like, how hard do you actually have to work? Like, I know there's a lot of sacrifices that you have to do, but compared to like someone who is tasked with, a lot of like grunt work for an organization or corporation, or any common worker who has a 9-to-5, how much more work do they actually do? And I got a big time wake up call with a prominent, let me see how I want to phrase this, with a prominent reporter for one of the sports, one of the 4 major sports in America. And I am helping handle their podcast. They have a pretty successful podcast. And I was under the impression they would have people on their team to handle, the editing, the uploading, the minutia of podcasting. So when I am on the phone with this person who all of us have most likely seen on our TV, working on how to edit and upload a podcast, I was like stunned that this person, while having 100 other things to do, is doing like my job and showing up on TV. It's just like crazy, crazy stuff. So what I would say is the people who you see and who on television are darn hard workers, at least most of the time, especially if they're not like a, former pro, or if they're not someone's sibling or nepotism isn't involved. Like, people in this industry, in the sports media industry, are crazy hard workers. So I know it's easy and fun sometimes to maybe bash them, but man, it is not an easy gig. So respect to that person who will not be named. But that's all the time that we have. We appreciate you checking out this episode of Straight Facts. I want to give a shout out to my guy James Jackson, who could not be here today, and my guy Stat Matt Robinson. I'm Jay Cali, almost said James Jackson, and these have been the facts.
Straight up.